VIP within the context of Samplitude stands for Virtual Project. A Samplitude VIP incorporates all the elements needed to record, edit, arrange and master your productions. When you record, load or import a WAV file into a VIP, it becomes a virtual object. This virtual object is linked to the original WAV file on your hard drive. Because all processing can remain in this virtual domain, it gives you a huge amount of flexibility. Therefore, any edits you make will be non-destructive, meaning the original audio files remain untouched. For most of this tutorial, I'm going to be using Universal Mouse Mode, which can be selected by clicking on the white arrow here. I find Universal Mouse Mode very convenient because when I place the mouse cursor at the bottom half of an object, it allows me to select or move that object, whereas placing it in the top half of an object lets me draw in a range. So it has a dual purpose function. Notice how the cursor changes shape depending on whether it's placed at the top half or the bottom half of the track. It takes a while to get used to, but it's well worth doing so in my opinion. I have done a tutorial that looks into mouse modes in greater depth. So to select an object in Universal Mouse Mode, you need to left click in the lower half of the object and it will change colour to show it's selected. Clicking in an empty space will deselect an object, and you can control left click to deselect as well. The default colour of a selected object is orange, although this can be changed by pressing Y to open System Options, then select Design, Colours to make any changes. There are various different scenarios when it comes to selecting objects. So this next part deals with object selection. I've added some colour in order to highlight the individual objects better. Left clicking on an object will select that object. Control A selects all objects. If the first object is selected, shift clicking on the last object will select all objects in between. You can select next or previous objects by holding down Shift plus the left and right arrows. These are the ones to the left of the question mark. Shift clicking diagonally will select all the objects inside that area. You can deselect individual objects by Control left clicking on the selected object. Maybe you want to copy a particular selection of objects to another part of an arrangement. One way would be to Control select the objects and then Control drag to copy them to the new location. To lasso select, left click in an adjacent empty space and draw the lasso selection over the objects you wish to select. Again, by holding down Control, you can copy these objects to a new part of the arrangement. You can also use a temporary lasso by using the hotkey Ctrl-Alt+L if you want to select a bunch of objects not accessible by lassoing from the edge. This command will only work for that one time. There is also a command called Switch Selection. Above that is Deselect Objects, although sometimes it will be faster to just click in an empty area to deselect objects. You can select objects that are under the play cursor by using the menu item Object, Select Objects, Select Objects. Position the play cursor over the objects and use that command. There's also a menu item called Select Objects in Active Track. If you're on version 11, you can also select all objects for the active track by double-clicking in an empty space on that track. So by using a mixture of hotkeys, menu items and modifiers, it's possible to customize your working methods. One way to copy objects is to left-click to select the object, then hold down Ctrl and drag a copy of the object to a new position. So now I have 4 objects. If I lasso select these 4 objects, I can hold down Ctrl again and drag them to the right, and now I have 8 objects, and so on and so forth. A convenient way to copy objects quickly is to select the object and use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+D. Each press of the keyboard will duplicate the object one more time. For continuous duplication, just keep the key pressed. If you want to duplicate a predefined number of objects, you can use the command called duplicate multiple. In this case, I'm going to select all these objects, then go to the menu item Object, Cut Objects, and you will see a command called Duplicate Objects Multiple. Then input the amount. I'll stay with 20. You can also choose to group the duplicated objects or not. Then press OK and the objects are duplicated. If you want to copy an object to the track below, just select the object, hold down Ctrl and pull it below. If you want to avoid horizontal movement when copying, hold down Ctrl plus Shift. This will restrict the horizontal movement when copying objects on the vertical axis. Holding down Shift alone will restrict horizontal movement when simply moving objects vertically. You can, of course, use copy and paste commands for copying objects. Select the object or objects you want to copy, then use the hotkey C. Place the play cursor and then press V. You can also insert objects. In this example, I'm going to create a shorter object. Draw in a range and press T. I want to insert this shorter object into the longer object above. Make sure it's selected and press C to copy. Place the play cursor at the location where you want the object inserted, then press V to insert the object. You can also find these commands in the Edit menu. In fact, there are 3 separate hotkeys assigned for these tasks. There is another way you can insert objects by using the mouse. Select the object and hold down the Control modifier to copy. Then left-click to drag the copied object to the desired location. Don't let go of the mouse button. Notice at the moment the new object cuts off the upstream object. You can fix this by doing the following. Keep the left mouse button pressed and then press V on the keyboard. The object will now be inserted and the remainder of the original object restored. The default hotkey for splitting an object is T, or you can use the menu item Object, Split Objects. Position the play cursor by clicking along the grid and marker bar. Pressing T will split the object of the selected track or of the selected object. If you Control left click to select several objects, pressing T will split all of those objects. If you're using universal mouse mode, you can position the play cursor by clicking in the top half of any object. Doing this will automatically select that track. Notice the track is now highlighted. Then press T to split that object. I'll undo that. Providing there are no previously selected objects under the cursor, the split will occur on that selected track. Any selected object under the cursor will take priority over the active track. Here's an example. The object for track 1 is already selected. If I click on track 3 to position the cursor, that track becomes active, but the top object is still selected. Pressing T now would split that object, but I want to split the object of the active track, so either press Ctrl plus Shift plus A to deselect that object, and then press T. I'll undo that, or just select the object on track 3 and then press T. In Universal Mouse Mode you can draw in a range and make a split based on the range selection. Or you can draw in a range and press Delete to remove that section. If Snap is enabled, the cursor or range will snap to that setting. Use the Alt modifier to override snapping, or just turn off snap. If you draw in a range in the grid and marker bar, double-clicking that range will create a range over the selected track. A subsequent double-click will create a range over all objects. This is a quick way if you want to split a selection over all objects. Double-clicking a third time will return to the original range. You can split single or multiple objects on the fly during playback. Just press T at the desired position. If no objects are selected, the object will be split based on the currently active track. If I select several objects, they will be split during playback when I press T. You can also split objects on the fly using Cut Mouse mode. Again, this will be based on the current snap setting, if enabled. Use the Alt modifier to cut without restrictions. Using Cut Mouse mode will not affect playback. If you have split some objects and want to revert back to the previously unsplit version, select the objects you want to heal and use the hotkey Ctrl-Alt-T, or use the menu item Object Heal Unsplit Objects. This command will only work providing you have not changed or moved the position of any of the objects. I am moving one of the objects as an example. Because the objects are no longer contiguous, the command is now being greyed out. If the volume has been changed on one of the selected objects, you will be prompted by a dialog box. Pressing Continue will heal the objects, and the volume will be set based on the first object. This part deals with resizing and trimming of objects. To enable Snap, click on the magnet icon on the toolbar or on the transport. This will fix the movement of objects or ranges based on the Snap setting, which is currently set to 1 bar. Now I'm selecting the object and placing the mouse cursor at the bottom right-hand corner. You can see a small square which is called an object handle. When I place the mouse cursor over this handle, it changes to a double-headed arrow. Left click and drag the object handle to the left to resize the object to 4 bars in length. This can be done from either the left or right side of an audio object. Because these edits are non-destructive, you can always drag the object out again to its original length. An alternative method would be to position the play cursor at bar 5, then press T on the keyboard, which is the keyboard shortcut for split objects, then press Delete. Now you have a 4-bar object again. Another method is to draw a range over a section of the object and then press Ctrl+T. Anything outside of this range selection will be removed. This is also known as Trim Objects. You can find this command via the right-click Context menu, along with many other object editing commands. Snapping restricts the movement of the object based on the snap value. As an example, if I disable snap by clicking on the magnet icon, I can move the object freely. If I enable snap, the object will move by the snap value set in the project options. Use the hotkey I to open the project options and you can define the snap value there. In this case, snap is enabled and the grid is set to bars and beats. The snap value is set to 1/4 bar. This can be changed from the drop-down list. Note that in Samplitude 11 you can now change the snap value from within the VIP. You can also set the snap value to the quantization value. If you open the Snap and Grid setup again, you will notice you can now save the project options as the default for new projects. You can also use a modifier to temporarily disable snap. Hold down Alt on the keyboard to move selected objects without restrictions. Releasing the Alt key will again restrict the object movement to the predefined snap value. I'll hide the waveform by pressing Tab on the keyboard to enable Draw Mode 2. Draw modes can be changed by pressing Shift+Tab to open the View options. As you can see, in Draw Mode 2 I have disabled Draw Samples. You can now get a better view of the object handles. There are 5 handles on an object. You need to have the object selected in order to see the object handles. The handles at the bottom left and right corners are for resizing the object. The handles in the upper half are fade in and fade out handles. If I re-enable the waveform, you can see how changing the fade also scales the size of the waveform. So this gives you a visual aid as well. There is also a single handle in the center of the object, and you can use this to change the volume. I'm now going to resize the object back to its original length. Left click and drag the object handle at the bottom right hand corner. I'm going to enable Auto Crossfade by clicking on the Auto Crossfade icon. Place the play cursor at bar 5 and hit T on the keyboard. And now we have an automatic crossfade between the two objects. You can then adjust the level of individual objects and there will be a smooth crossfade between them. Double-clicking on an object will open the object editor. If you're using Universal Mouse Mode, you will need to double-click on the bottom half of the object. Then click on Position Fades, and it's possible to change the desired fade. I'm deleting the right object. You'll notice that since I've deleted the second object, the first object is now longer than 4 bars. Let me undo the last action and I'll pull the second object down onto the track below. You can see both objects have been extended over the crossfade area. In order for two objects to have a crossfade, there needs to be enough spare audio so they can overlap. So Samplitude does this automatically, providing you have auto crossfade enabled. I'm hiding the waveform for this bit. If you select or group a bunch of objects that are vertically time-aligned, like these are, adjusting the fade in and fade out of one object will affect all the other objects. If any of the objects of that selection start or end on a different vertical time axis, use the Alt modifier if you want to include those objects when adjusting fades. To demonstrate, I will make a selection of different length objects. Notice the fades on the short objects don't move when adjusting fades on the longer objects. Holding down the Alt modifier will now include the shorter objects as well. Likewise, when adjusting fades on the shorter objects, the longer ones don't react. So holding down the Alt modifier will include the longer objects as well. If I select several objects on the horizontal and vertical axis, you will see that the fades move together on the vertical axis, but not on the horizontal axis. So again, you can use the Alt modifier to adjust all the fades simultaneously. This works regardless of which fade handle I move. When it comes to adjusting object volume, providing the required objects are selected, the volume handles will move together without the need of modifiers. There's also something called Build Loop Object. It's important to select the object first. I'm going to draw a range over the section I want to turn into a looped object. Use the hotkey Ctrl+T to trim the object. I'll move that to the start of bar 1. Now press Ctrl+L, which is the keyboard shortcut for Build Loop Object. Now grab the right object handle and pull it outwards, and the original object will be looped. So now it's been given the label loop. Pressing Ctrl+L again will snap the object back to its original size. It's worth noting that it's possible to remove sections of a looped object without affecting the remainder. Just make a selection and hit delete. These empty sections can be restored by dragging the object over to fill the gap again. So that's how you build looped objects. To group objects, select the objects you want to add to a group and then click on the Group Object button. Or choose Group Object from the Object menu. You can ungroup objects by clicking on the Ungroup Objects button, or from the Object menu again. As you can see, the currently assigned hotkeys are shown alongside the menu items as well. Once objects have been added to a group, they will be labelled with the group number. If the group number doesn't show, press Shift+Tab to open the view options and make sure you have group number ticked. Clicking on one object will now select all objects of that group. This means you can move the group around by just clicking on one of the objects, then drag it to the desired destination. Grouped objects allow you to change the volume levels simultaneously. You can temporarily exclude all objects from a group by going to the menu item Object, select Objects, Temporary Exclude All Objects from Group. When this is selected, you will see the Ungroup Objects button is now blinking. Once you have finished editing the objects outside of the group, it's just a matter of clicking on the flashing button and the objects will be regrouped as before. You can also temporarily remove a single object from a group. Click on the object that you want ungrouped, then use the hotkey Ctrl+Shift+U or menu item Object, select Objects, Temporary Exclude Object from Group. The object will then be deselected. When you've finished making changes, just select that object and press Ctrl+Shift+U. The object will be re-added to the group again. Groups are handy if you have something like a guitar riff or a backing vocal that repeats several times in a song. By grouping these parts, it means that if you adjust the volume on one part, all the other parts of that group will be changed as well. This saves you having to reselect individual objects every time. You can also move or copy these groups to another location in the song. Different from grouping objects is linking objects. Normal object mode is the default, but if I select the Link One Track icon, when I move an object, all objects to the right are selected and moved as well. Whatever object I select, all objects upstream of that object will move. A useful tip is to use the K modifier. Using this will link objects temporarily without the need to change from normal mouse mode. Notice that when I hold down K, normal mouse mode changes to Link One Track. This means I can select and move all objects upstream while holding down this modifier. Conversely, if the Link Objects icon is already turned on, pressing the K modifier will temporarily allow you to move an object without it affecting the upstream objects. This works by temporarily switching back to normal object mode. You need to keep this modifier depressed during this action. If I click on the Link All Tracks icon, all objects on all tracks, either aligned or upstream to that object, are selected. They can then be moved all together. You can also use a modifier to temporarily link all tracks. Holding down L will switch from normal mouse mode to Link All Tracks mode. Notice how the Link All Tracks icon highlights when I press this key. So using this modifier lets you move all objects of all tracks upstream from the selected object. Next, I'm selecting the Link Until Silence icon. Now when I move some objects, only the ones before the gap or silence are moved. Link Until Silence only works on a per-track basis. If I switch back to Link One Track, you can see these gaps are ignored. If you have automation on a track and you decide you want to move the objects along with automation, click on the Link Curves to Objects icon. Now when I move or copy the objects, the automation follows as well. When you've finished using these special object selection modes, make sure you click on Normal Object Mode again. To mute objects, select the required objects and press Ctrl+M. Or use the menu item Objects, Mute Objects. The muted objects will then be labelled MUL and MUR. This stands for, not surprisingly, mute left and mute right. Muted objects will have the waveform greyed out. Muting a track will also grey out the waveform. If this isn't happening, press Shift plus Tab to open the View options. Make sure you have grey out muted objects tracks ticked. One of the unique features of Samplitude and Sequoia is the object editor. I have created an in-depth tutorial series explaining how the object editor works. If you're not familiar with the concept, I suggest you check the tutorials out. The object editor lets you add insert effects, as well as pitch shifting and time stretching, and more, on a per object basis. When this object is played back, the effects are processed in real time. But you can, if you desire, freeze an object or objects. This results in the FX being rendered into a new audio file which replaces the original in the VIP. As an example, I've added some effects to 3 objects. If I double-click on the top object, the object editor opens. To freeze this object, just tick the Freeze checkbox. These effects have now been rendered and removed from the object editor. To unfreeze, untick the Freeze checkbox. You can freeze multiple objects by selecting the objects and ticking the Freeze checkbox again. All the selected objects are now frozen. Again, untick the checkbox to unfreeze the selected objects. This function can also be accessed via the Object menu under Freeze Objects. If you have multiple objects on the timeline, you may want to consolidate them into one single object. One way of doing this is to glue the objects together. This will replace the multiple objects with a single object. The difference being that Track Freeze will freeze all objects for that track, whereas gluing will only glue the selected objects. Gluing will also render any object effects into the new file. Just select the objects and click on the yellow glue gun, or use the menu item Objects, Glue Objects. There are also keyboard shortcuts for this function. The newly created file will be saved in the Freeze folder. To reverse this process, just double-click to open the object editor and untick Freeze. You can also glue MIDI objects. Select the objects, then click the glue gun or use the shortcut. You can also glue multiple MIDI objects. Select the objects and hit the glue gun. All the MIDI objects will be glued for their respective tracks. Another option is to use MIDI bounce. This will consolidate multiple MIDI objects into one single MIDI object. Select the required MIDI objects first, then go to the menu item MIDI, MIDI Bounce, Freeze Demix, MIDI Bouncing. You will then be prompted with a dialog box. Choose the Whole Project option. This will bounce all the MIDI objects into one single object. The second option will create a new MIDI object based on the range selection. First, I'm selecting all the MIDI objects. Now I'm drawing a range over them. Choose MIDI Bounce from the menu, but this time choose Selection in Range. So now a newly bounced MIDI object has been created based on the range selection. The source MIDI objects are left unchanged. If I select a shorter range and repeat the procedure, choose Selection Range again. So now a new MIDI object has been created based on that shorter range. If the object lock buttons are not showing, press Shift plus Tab to open the view options and enable object lock buttons. I'm also opening the object lock definitions. You can more or less disable everything. I'm going to disable moving, volume changes and also length changes. You can now see the objects have a small key icon on them. If I lock an object, moving, volume changes and length changes will not be possible. If I select several objects and click one of the locks, all of the selected objects will be protected based on the object lock definitions. Clicking on the track padlock will lock all objects for that track based on the lock definitions. There's also a padlock icon on the toolbar, purely for quickly locking all objects in time. So there are plenty of ways to protect your projects against unintentional actions. You can save individual objects complete with the settings. For example, I have an object here which is using Object Volume Automation. If I double-click to open the object editor, you can see I have two plugins inserted for the object, plus an EQ setting, custom fade settings, and the audio is pitch shifted by -2 semitones. Make sure the object is selected, then go to the File menu and select Save Object. I'm saving it to the current project folder, although you may want to create a folder for specifically saving objects with effects. I have an empty project already loaded. Go to the File menu and select Open Project, Object. So that previously saved object has been loaded, complete with saved settings intact.